Be tried, but I want to speak briefly about sentencing. The guidelines. Can you impose this sentence concurrently? And in addition, can you go outside the guidelines for someone who has no priors? In other words, the murder 2 carries with it the maximum possibility of 40 years in prison. Murder 3, 25 years in prison. Man 2, 10 years in prison. Can you add them all up and shake or no?
Shep, that's a great question. No, you cannot add these up because they're all based on the exact same conduct. And that's something that I thought was going to be confusing for the jury. Apparently it wasn't when they went back there and looked at the charge. But when you charge someone with different offenses that are all based on the exact same conduct, no, those cannot be sentenced back to back to back. He can't even actually have multiple convictions. That's confusing. The jury can find you guilty of all 3. But Judge Cahill will sentence him on one of those offenses. It'll be the highest offense, the second-degree murder conviction. With regard to the exact sentence that Cahill gives, as a general rule, and this is almost fundamental, judges will go down from the sentencing guidelines sometimes, but they will not go up. So part of what Judge Cahill will consider is not only Derek Chauvin and what he did to George Floyd, but also Derek Chauvin compared to other officers who've been convicted of comparable crimes. And so I think that we should expect to see something that is consistent with the presumptive sentencing guideline in this case.
Regarding sentencing, Arthur, will there be hearings in the way that there often are at sentencings, or is this something that the judge will? Oftentimes, in court proceedings, you save the character witnesses. For instance, Philonise Floyd, George Floyd's brother, you would save that for the sentencing phase. But in Minnesota, they allow that testimony during the case in chief.
So what you're talking about, Shepard, usually happens in death penalty cases where the jury's going to decide whether there's a death penalty. Here, if you remember, after summations, there was a whole argument, not an argument, but a proceeding with the judge, and he asked Mr. Nelson to basically what's called allocute defendant Chauvin about a Blakely hearing. And that means they could have had a hearing about whether the aggravated sentencing should come into play. But instead, they waived that hearing, and now the judge is going to make that decision as to whether or not there are enough aggravating factors so he should be sentenced at the higher guidelines. And at the end of today's proceedings, if you heard, the judge set the schedule. I believe in 1 week, the prosecutor's papers are due, then the defense has some time to respond, then the judge's decision will come down, and then the sentencing will be 8 weeks down the road. So it's going to be, from my understanding, from what we heard today from the judge, it's all going to be done on papers until the sentence is actually handed down by the judge.
Shepard Smith here. Thanks for watching CNBC on YouTube.